I'm going to be talking to you about how adults find themselves trapped in a situation of clergy sexual abuse. Ruth will then take it to discussing the institution. And I'm going to be using the male pronoun for the religious leader for the sake of ease, not to say it's only men who are perpetrators. And although I'm from the Mennonite tradition, I am sorry to say this is not limited to the Mennonite tradition. A woman went to her pastor for advice, not for sex. She never expected that a pastor would do anything so egregious as to manipulate her into having sex with him. And the worst part was, because she was an adult, she blamed herself for having an affair with her pastor, and she hid silently in her shame. But it's not an affair. It's an abuse of power. Sex between two parties where there is any differential in power is not even about sex. It's about power and control over the one who has less power. Now, if this woman had been approached by a stranger at a party, she would have known that the sexual advances, they were obvious. But when it's a pastor, she was caught completely off guard. She never expected this. She thought she was reading more into what the pastor intended. She ignored her screaming intuition, warning her that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't easy to rebuff that first pastoral hug, let alone the second, or the third, or the fourth. She didn't want to offend her pastor. She held him in high esteem because of his position. When looking back, the hardest thing for her was to forgive herself. She asked, why couldn't I have stopped it? I'm an adult. I know the difference between right and wrong. It's hard to admit when you're being used that you've been duped by someone you trust. She wondered why she just let it happen. The problem was she had no idea that it was happening, when it was happening, because the pastor manipulated her to such a point where she doubted herself, and her ability to say no was completely undermined. But just because she didn't say no doesn't mean she said yes. The problem was not that the woman was vulnerable because she was the one with the less power in the situation. The problem, the real problem, was that the pastor preyed upon and exploited her vulnerability. That was the problem. Now, pastors who are predators set the stage perfectly. They play the role of devoted husband, father, servant of the church and of the larger community, and they're masterful at managing the impressions others have of themselves. They paint a portrait of one who is an exemplary, charismatic leader and teacher. But that pastoral portrait is more like the portrait of Dorian Gray. There is a secret and deceitful monster locked away in a dark and hidden closet. This is the perfect setup for everyone to believe the pastor. And that woman knows until that real portrait is unveiled, no one will believe her. Women like this, and men, get caught in what is referred to as the grooming process. And when pastors overstep professional boundaries and make sexual advances upon someone under their care, they are like any other predator, clergy or not. and they interact with their victims in the same destructive ways. They slyly spin their web around a potential victim and slowly and methodically move in for the kill. Step 1, gain their trust. Step 2, physically isolate them, maybe in a counseling session. Step 3, give short pastoral hugs upon greeting and parting. Step 4 is emotional isolation. Make the conversation increasingly personal. Find out their dreams, their issues, their weaknesses, and offer to mentor them. And subtly slip in questions about their sexual life. Touch their hand in a caring manner. Step 5, prime them for the next step through flattery and making them feel special, warranting the pastor's attention. A potential victim will not question the integrity of the words of a man of God. Step 6, that pastor enmeshes himself in that victim's life. They get to know their spouse, their children, their family, their friends, to make sure that in public, everyone, especially that victim, believes that this relationship is completely normal. Step 7, when in public, throw knowing glances or brush by them in very non-accidental ways, cementing the secretiveness of their special relationship. Step 8 is psychological isolation. In private, subtly criticize or question their family, other people who advise them, their friends, their spouse. Give a long and more meaningful pastoral hug. Step 9, share privileged information, even of the pastor's own unhappiness, loneliness, their own marital dissatisfaction. In brief, seep under their skin and into all their places of least resistance and greatest need, and make it so that the victim believes they need this pastor. Grooming can take a few days, but it can also take a few years, depending upon the skill and the patience of that pastoral perpetrator. Step 10, move beyond the pastoral hug to the sexual touching. All of this causes great confusion for the victim. How is one to reconcile this publicly venerated man of God with this secretive man doing something so wrong? The victim is an adult, and she should know right from wrong. And the pastor is the epitome of the public example of what is right. And yet the pastor is able to manipulate this person to the point where the concept of right and wrong becomes totally distorted. It's almost impossible to pinpoint when the sexual advances began. The bond between them is sealed when the pastor receives, articulated or not, a reassurance that the secret is safe. Of course, the pastor tells the victim, "You're the only one." And the victim wonders, what did I do to invite this? Did I want these sexual advances because I didn't resist them? Perhaps I tempted this great man of God, and maybe now I'm posing a threat to his reputation. But she keeps silent. And through her silence, she, 1, adds to her own victimization, 2, becomes complicit in protecting him, and 3, she cannot warn any future victims. It's really risky to reveal abuse to the religious authorities who would have the power to hold the perpetrator accountable. Because will the victim be supported? Will she be believed? Or will she be re-victimized to protect the image of the institution? This is even more traumatizing than the original abuse. And on top of all of this is the embarrassment that I, as an adult, fell into this. The damage caused by clergy sexual abuse reaches beyond the victim, and it violates the spiritual life of the entire church community. There is a massive sense of betrayal. And not to recognize this as pastoral abuse, an abuse of power, and to call it an illicit affair excuses the heinous acts of one who has betrayed so many and places the blame on the shoulders of the one who was betrayed the most. And the victim feels betrayed by herself. Why did I just stand back and watch as this man completely ruined my life? Why? Do not ask her to forgive her perpetrator. She will need to travel a long and very painful journey of healing to where someday, she might be able to forgive herself. Sex with a pastor can never be called an affair. Sex with a pastor is abuse. Thank you.